Brexit, the playful fun name that's been given to a disaster. It's like if you said an animal died of autoerotic asphyxiation. It's cute, although when you think about the actual consequences, it becomes quite sad. It has now been 2.5 years since Britain voted to leave the EU. The long story short of it is there was a bus with a lie on it, people made a massively consequential decision by a narrow margin, and ever since, the subject of the impending Brexit has dominated every waking moment in British life. It even comes up on reality shows like this one called Love Island.
What do you think about Brexit?
What's that? Like,
Where we're leaving the European Union.
I seriously don't have a clue.
So, like, it was to leave the EU, so we wouldn't be part of Europe.
EU,
which would mean, like, welfare and, like, things we trade with would be cut down.
So does that mean we won't have any cheese?
Cheese?
Trees?
Oh.
No, that's got nothing to do with it, babe. That's weather.
Wouldn't we have trees?
Doesn't it mean it would be harder to, like, go to, like, Spain and stuff?
So it'd be harder to go on holidays?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, I love my holidays.
Yeah.
OK, so there's a lot to unpack there, absolutely none of which is worth unpacking. It's like coming over to help a friend move and finding all his boxes are labelled "Dead Spiders for Mommy." Yeah, you could unpack that, but it's probably better to just burn everything to the ground and never speak of it again. The point is, you cannot escape talk about Brexit in the UK. It's something brilliantly captured by a TV show there called Gogglebox. It's a show in Britain where you get to watch other people watch TV. It's actually great, trust me. Just eavesdrop on some British people watching the news.
Why did David Cameron call a referendum in the first place? He should be bloody in prison.
Britain want to have their cake and eat it. They want to trade with the rest of the world, but they'll also have the benefit of trading with Europe.
I am halfway through the 585-page withdrawal agreement.
No.
Yes.
Who are you?
It's like one of those mugs I saw in Pusey, Mary. Different day, same old shit. Mary.
I don't like you swearing.
I saw it on a mug. I'm just quoting what I read on a mug.
OK.
Here's something else I saw in a mug, Mary. It said, "This marriage is like a locomotive lying on my chest, crushing my spirit to dust." I'm just quoting what I saw in a mug, Mary. Don't blame me, blame the mug. People in Britain are completely exhausted by Brexit talk, and the crazy thing is, it hasn't even happened yet, although it has already had big effects on the British economy. In the wake of the Brexit vote, the UK has become one of the worst-performing economies in the G7. Major companies like Nissan and Dyson are moving operations out of Britain, and the pound has dropped by almost 14%. And all of this will come to a head just 40 days from now on March 29th, when the UK is set to officially leave the EU. And it could be an absolute catastrophe, because nothing is happening the way that was promised. Britain was supposed to leave the EU in orderly stages, first entering a transition period on March 29th, during which it would negotiate its future relationship with the EU and then leave entirely. And Prime Minister Theresa May has spent the last 2 years locking down the terms of that transition plan with the EU. But when she presented this agreed-upon deal to Parliament, this happened.
Theresa May suffers the biggest Commons defeat in history.
This was the moment the defeat was announced.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
Wait, what was that noise there? That was the biggest Commons defeat in British history, and they sounded like a middle school lunchroom who just heard someone call to the principal's office. Oh, Theresa's in trouble! Now, incidentally, we can't show that moment in the UK because of their stupid law banning parliamentary footage in comedy shows. So when this show airs there tomorrow night, it will be replaced by a clip from a 1983 Chippendales exercise video instead, with absolutely no explanation. So this is what they will see.
This was the moment the defeat was announced.
What they'll get, they'll be confused by it, and it will be all their fault. Now, the point is, the defeat of Theresa May's deal raises the spectre of what many consider to be the worst-case scenario here. The UK dropping out of the EU next month with no transition plan in place. It's the so-called no-deal scenario, and the ramifications of that could be massive, not just for the UK or the EU, but for the entire world. So tonight, let's try and answer a few questions. Why don't people like Theresa May's deal? What happens if the UK leaves with no deal? And could they just not do Brexit at all? And let's start with why Parliament rejected her deal. There's a lot of reasons that people don't like it, but the biggest sticking point has to do with Northern Ireland. And let me explain here. You see, the UK is actually 4 countries: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. A Fab 4. Sort of like the Beatles. I won't say who the Ringo is because that would be unfair to Wales. Now, Northern Ireland shares a border with the Republic of Ireland, and right now, everything you see here is part of the EU, so goods and people can move freely between them. But the whole point of Brexit is for the UK to leave the EU, and that could put a hard border across Ireland, and that could be a big problem in a region that has been plagued by sectarian violence. And I don't have time to get into the socio-political history of Ireland right now, so feel free to Google IRA bombings, or Bloody Sunday, or Daniel Day-Lewis's 1990s film output, or do you know what? I'll just let the Cranberries sum it all up in about 10 seconds.
With their tanks and their bombs and their bombs and their guns in your head, they are dying.
That's basically it. Tanks, bombs, guns, absolutely no more than 4 chords. You know, Ireland. Now, in the Troubles, thousands of people died, businesses on the border were regularly bombed, and checkpoints became targets. So removing them was a centrepiece to the historic Good Friday Agreement of 1998, which brought a fragile peace to the whole region. Returning to checkpoints in any way, shape or form is going to re-inflame tensions, as people who live there know.
If somebody builds a customs post on the border between the North and Southern Ireland, people will shoot at it. And they'll shoot at the people who work in it. That's absolutely 100% certain.
Wow, that is striking. Because normally, for people to be that certain that something will be a disaster, they need to see Will Smith in Blueface. So, everyone here agrees there cannot be a hard border there again. But how do you avoid that? Because if you are not in the EU, goods have to be screened somewhere, like you would at any international border, and no one has yet come up with a plausible solution for this. Some, including former Foreign Secretary and untitled Gary Busey project, Boris Johnson, have proposed elaborate workarounds, including technologies that don't yet exist, and customs screenings near but not at the border. But Ireland is not remotely convinced by those. And when journalists pushed Boris Johnson for more details on this, his response did not inspire confidence.
Nobody thinks it's a realistic plan because they don't think Ireland would accept it.
The EU does.
Don't run away. We want to ask you some serious questions because you've just done a load of interviews. Why don't you talk to Channel 4 and answer a couple of questions? This is absurd. You want to have a serious conversation about Brexit and then you ride off without talking to us. Why can't you answer any serious questions?
I'll tell you why Boris can't answer any serious questions. He doesn't have any answers. In fact, the only question he's ever capable of answering is, what would it look like if Gordon Ramsay was tumble-dried on high? So, just in case no one comes up with a solution for this unfixable problem by the end of the transition period, the EU and Theresa May agreed on something called a backstop. Now, under it, Northern Ireland would broadly live under EU rules, and there would be a hard border between it and the rest of the UK, and that would remain in effect until they came up with a permanent solution to the border problem, a solution that, remember, does not exist. The problem is, Brexiteers have strong reservations about the backstop, and they want Theresa May to renegotiate it. But the EU says that they are done negotiating, leaving Britain hurtling towards the ever-increasing possibility of leaving next month with no deal in place at all. So, what happens if there is no deal? Well, first, ironically, there will be a hard border in Ireland, the one thing that everyone agrees they don't want. But the consequences would go much further than that, because it won't just be the Irish border where there will be customs checks. Brand new screenings will be required at every point of entry. And at major British ports like Dover, where trucks arrive on ferries, that could mean chaos.
Under a no-deal Brexit, World Trade Organization rules would kick in overnight, meaning customs inspections on every vehicle. By one estimate, if customs delayed each truck by just 70 additional seconds, the wait to board the ferry could reach 6 days.
Yeah, And that's a problem, because the whole system is built on seamless movement. Introduce any hitch into that system and it all breaks down. It's like being a supermarket checkout when one person brings a fruit that the cashier doesn't know. Hold on a second. You are not trying to buy a dragon fruit at a Kroger at 6 p.m. on a rainy Sunday. Get the fuck out of here. You drop that fruit. You drop that fruit. You walk away. Not up in here. Not up in here. And look, any perishable goods will be particularly hard hit by delays at ports, as this flour importer will tell you.
If things get delayed, our shipment gets delayed, and we're trading with no flour, so we need free movement, and it will affect us.
What's at stake for you if we don't get this right?
Everything. My family, my house, everything, my staff. We've been trading for 33 years.
Yeah, that's very sad, because people do tend to want flowers now and alive. Although you may actually feel slightly less sorry for that man when you hear what he said next.
We've been trading for 33 years, and I did vote to leave.
Do you regret that?
I definitely have second thoughts now. But
when you voted leave, did you not think, well, this is going to affect my flowers?
I didn't really think about it like that. I didn't really think about the business side of it.
Yeah, well, you probably should have done, shouldn't you? And now you have pretty much fucked yourself with a rusty piece of rebar, which isn't offensive. It's something I saw in a mug, so it's fine. The mug makes it okay, Mary. You trust the mug, always. Now, look, the chilling prospect of a no-deal Brexit has now become likely enough that the government has released over 100 guidance documents instructing people about what to do if it does happen. Everything from how pesticides will be regulated to what the new procedures would be for taking your horse abroad. Although, I think I can actually solve that one for you right now. Take off its shoes, put it in a separate tray, and look innocently confused when airport security starts asking whose fucking horse this is. And while some of what will happen in a no-deal scenario may go into the category of manageable annoyance, there are some genuinely alarming issues like, will there be a shortage of medication that comes from other countries that could affect someone like this girl with cerebral palsy and epilepsy?
She has 3 drugs that she has that are critical, and without them, she will have multiple seizures in a day.
It's one of the biggest countries in the world financially. And I'm sitting here thinking, will I be able to get medicines in 2 months' time? It's a completely crazy situation.
Yeah, you're right about that. Because medicine shortages are not a problem that Britons expect to deal with. They're used to having their problems limited to hearing Americans mispronounce the word vitamin, not having enough beans as part of your breakfast, and having to wait 20 years for another royal wedding. How are you still single, George? Settle down already. You're this many. Find a fiancé for us to ferociously judge. And if all of this is not already frightening enough, there are warnings of empty shelves, and some Britons have begun stockpiling food or buying so-called Brexit boxes, which, when you see what's actually inside them, seems pretty grim.
They may look like tins of paint, but they could be dinner, a la Brexit. Every Brexit box contains all you need to whip up family favourites like chili con carne, chicken tikka, and even fajitas.
Now, putting aside how unappetising a paint can of wet meat sounds, let's also not overlook the metaphorical significance of every dish in the Brexit box being something that came to Britain from another country and greatly improved the lives of everyone there. Now, things look dire here. Under any form of Brexit, Britain's economic options are basically bad and worse. The government's own analysis suggests that under a Brexit like Theresa May's plan, the UK economy could be up to 3.9% smaller after 15 years, which sounds bad until you learn that under a no-deal Brexit, we're looking at an economy as much as 9.3% smaller. And a slowdown like that would not just hurt Britain, it would ripple across the entire world. And yet, incredibly, some in Britain remain completely unfazed by all this, drawing confidence from the worst possible examples.
I lost a grandfather in the First World War, I lost an uncle in the Second World War, and we survived.
Are you not a little bit concerned that we're talking about this political event the same way that we're talking about the aftermath of world wars?
No, I'm not. I think it's the same sort of situation.
But it isn't, though, is it? Because the world wars were provoked. They were a response to outside events. Brexit is something that Britain has done to itself. Britain is basically Pompeii if Pompeii had voted for the volcano. A bus said the volcano would be good. I believe the bus. And the mug backed it up. You trust mugs? And this brings us to the final question here. If all of this is going to be so bad, could Britain just not do this? To which the answer is technically yes. In December, the European Court of Justice ruled that the UK can simply revoke its intention to withdraw. That is a big indication that Europe would take Britain back. And an even bigger indication is the existence of the Reunion Boys, a Dutch group who described themselves as a boy band driven to reunite Great Britain with the EU. And if you think they didn't make a music video, you clearly don't understand why I'm bringing this up.
Britain come back, Britain come back, Britain come back to us. It's not too late to turn around. Britain come back, Britain come back. Promise we can change. Can we make you change your mind?
Dope. I mean, it's the classic boy band formula, isn't it? You get 5 Eurotrash hunks, you dress 2 like fishermen, 2 like guys who run a VC firm, and 1 like a Marxist gorilla with a throat cold. You put them on the world's greyest, dankest beach, and you have them croon in different keys about the dissolution of a customs union. It's just textbook. And look, if I'm honest, that clip does not make a completely airtight case for staying in the EU. But the rap break certainly does.
We'll always be connected. Our lives are intertwined. You can't change your course without remorse. Look at what you leave behind.
Hold on there. You really think British people are going to be impressed by your abs? We're British. If there's one thing people know about us, it's that we all have spectacular abs. Look, mine are obviously amazing. The Queen's are completely insane. So why don't you take your little Eurozone 4-pack and hit the gym pencil neck? And while clearly that band is a pretty solid argument for leaving the EU on any terms necessary, what if Britain did want to stay? How would that even happen? Well, Theresa May and Parliament could weigh the evidence and decide that Brexit is not worth it. That would be the truly courageous thing to do. They won't do it because of the political backlash that they get for defying the popular will. But that is why some have suggested a second referendum. Now, that would not be easy. First, the shortest estimate of the time it would take to organise a vote is 22 weeks, and there's just 6 weeks left. And also, what exactly would people vote on? Would it be Remain in the EU versus Theresa May's Brexit? Or Remain versus the no-deal Brexit? Or would you put all 3 options on the ballot, probably split the vote, fail to get a clear majority for any option, and somehow make this whole mess even worse? Because the reality is, this situation is far too complex for an up or down referendum, which, by the way, was also true of the first fucking one. Because when voters were just asked to leave or stay without a sense of what that might actually mean, the first referendum was a terrible idea because it was the government punting a difficult decision to the people, which, in the people's defence, is not their job. They elect politicians to make reasoned, fact-based decisions on their behalf. That's how representative democracy works. And you know who could have told you all of this at the time? The people of Gogglebox. Just watch them react to the referendum being announced in 2016.
Do you think everybody knows enough to be able to vote? Because God, I know there must be other people like me.
Oh, this is what's worrying me. I'm worried that people aren't well informed enough
the gravitas
to
of
make
what's
the
going
decision.
I don't understand it.
Well,
and then I don't want to vote on something that I don't really, truly understand.
Right. That is an intelligent thing to say. Sometimes you don't know stuff, so you hire someone else to know it for you. If you came to your doctor with stomach pain and he said, well, what do you think? Should your appendix leave or remain? You'd probably say, don't ask me, do your fucking job. Look, a true act of political courage at this point wouldn't be to call for a second referendum, something that Theresa May's already said that she won't do. It would be to acknowledge that the first one was fatally flawed and that carrying it out will do long-term damage to the country and then cancelling Brexit altogether. But it seems that there is no way that that's going to happen. Instead, Britain seems determined to step firmly down upon the rake of history and suffer the consequences. And I wish I could offer you a rousing Churchillian speech now about how everything's going to be okay. But under the circumstances, honestly, the best I can offer you is this.
People of Britain, throughout history we've faced our share of dark hours. The Great War, the Blitz, and that time when Deborah accidentally used Howard's custard in her own trifle.
Where's my custard? Oh no! I'm so sorry, Howard.
And through all this, our stiff upper lip has prevailed. Because this country is not for turning. Not when other countries have tried to destroy us, and not when we're in the midst of trying to destroy ourselves. And I know some are yelling, "Britain, come back! Don't do this! You're pointlessly fucking yourselves!" And to them, we say, oh, we have not even begun to fuck ourselves. We shall fuck ourselves at the ports. We shall fuck ourselves in the shops. We shall fuck ourselves in the hospitals and in the fields. We shall never surrender. And when the dust clears, what will remain? Britain. Not the same Britain, certainly. A worse one, with a weaker economy, possibly no fresh fruit, and a great deal of confusion over how horses can go on holiday. But Britain nonetheless. And once we've delivered this mortal wound to ourselves, we will savor the taste of victory. A victory that tastes like mummified chicken fajitas.